In this video, we will review the multidimensional approach to human behavior that social workers use to guide their practice. In this video, students will become more comfortable with outlining the elements of a multidimensional person and environment approach to human behavior, and to apply knowledge of this framework to recommend guidelines for social work engagement, assessment, intervention, and evaluation. To get started, let's look at the mission of the social work profession. The NASW Code of Ethics Preamble explains the mission of the social work profession. The purpose of the social work profession is to promote human and community well-being, guided by a person and environment framework, a global perspective, respect for human diversity, and knowledge based on scientific inquiry. The purpose of social work is actualized through its quest for social and economic justice, the prevention of conditions that limit human rights, the elimination of poverty, and the enhancement of the quality of life for all persons. In the following slides, you'll learn more about social work's focus on promoting both individual and community well-being within a multidimensional framework of human behavior. In other videos, we'll talk about the other components of the purpose of the social work profession. In this video, we'll focus on individual and community well-being and the multidimensional framework of human behavior. We'll start with talking about how social workers promote both human and community well-being. In other words, social workers are not only interested in helping individuals to improve their quality of life, but they're also interested in the well-being of collectives. And collectives of people can be communities, small groups, families, dyads or couples. This is shown in social work's distinction of 3 different levels of practice. There is social work practice on the micro, meso, and macro levels. This image explains the 3 levels of social work practice in more detail. Social workers engaging in micro-level practice work primarily with individuals and families. Social workers working at the meso level are generally working with groups and organizations. Finally, when social workers do macro practice, they are working towards large system change. This usually involves community intervention and policy intervention. Let's take a minute to check your knowledge. Let's go back to the mission of social work. We have learned that the purpose of the social work profession is to promote human and community well-being. Now, let's talk about how social workers achieve this purpose. The multidimensional approach is at the core of the mission of the social work profession. The NASW Code of Ethics preamble highlights the person in environment framework as a guide for social work practice. In the next few slides, we'll discuss the theoretical underpinnings and history of social work's multidimensional approach to understanding human behavior. Sometimes the person in environment framework is referred to rather as the person and environment framework because the focus is not always primarily on the person. As we see in meso and macro level practice, the identified client for a social worker is not always an individual. Social workers could be working with a collective as their client. For example, in family therapy, the identified client may be the family as a whole and not any individual person in the family. So, traditionally, social work practice is rooted in a person and environment perspective. However, the language has begun to shift towards a person and environment framework because the focus of social work intervention is not only on the individual. Sometimes it is on communities or groups or families. Social work's multidimensional approach is partially borrowed from psychology's biopsychosocial approach. However, the biopsychosocial approach misses some key dimensions of the person, most notably the spiritual dimension. However, this approach lays a foundation for social work's multidimensional approach to human behavior. As you'll learn later in this course, social work is highly influenced by the systems perspective. Uni Bronfenbrenner was one of the earliest and widely known systems theorists. He proposed that there are 5 levels of systems: microsystems, mesosystems, exosystems, macrosystems, and chronosystems. You'll notice that this categorization is very similar, yet different, to the one that we'll use in this course to discuss dimensions of the environment and the person. Microscopic systems refer to the dimensions within the individual person. In the visual here is at the center of the circle where the child is. As you move into the outer rings of the diagram, you move out of these individual systems of the person into the mesosystem, which refers to the systems that interact with the microsystem or the person on a regular basis and are part of the person's daily life. Some examples would include family, childcare providers, churches, or other communities of worship, and neighborhoods. Exosystems go one level out further from the microsystem and refer to the systems that influence a person but are not necessarily part of their daily life. Some examples are neighbors, agencies that the person comes into contact with, like social welfare, extended family, friends of family. And then finally, on this outer rung is the macro system, which refers to broader concepts that affect the microsystem or the person. Macro systems refer to attitudes, customs, ideologies of a culture that a person lives in. Lastly, at the bottom of the diagram, you'll see that there's an arrow to denote time, and there's one last level or system called the chronosystem. The chronosystem is the first time in history that time has been acknowledged as a significant dimension of human behavior. And Bronfenbrenner describes the chronosystem as environmental changes and transitions over the lifespan. Let's take a minute to check in and check your knowledge. Social workers are concerned with multi-determined behavior. A multidimensional approach to behavior can also be conceptualized as understanding behavior as multi-determined. This means that one behavior can have multiple causes, and a behavior may have different causes for different people. And so this means that behavior develops as a result of many causes, not just one. Behavior is likely influenced by unique interactions between the person, the environment, and time dimensions. Social work's person and environment construct has historically recognized both person and environment as complex and multidimensional, but that there are several identifiable dimensions. Let's take a minute to define dimension. A dimension refers to a feature that can be focused on separately, but that cannot be understood without also considering the other dimensions. The three broad categories of dimensions that we'll focus on in this course are the person, the environment, and time. Within each of these categories, there are several subdimensions, and the following slides will define each of these subdimensions. And each of these subdimensions will be covered in more detail throughout the course in later modules. Let's take another minute to check in. A person dimension includes four main subdimensions: the biological dimension, the psychological dimension, the social or psychosocial dimension, and the spiritual dimension. The social work multidimensional approach adds spirituality to the traditional biopsychosocial model. Sometimes the social subdimension is merged with the psychological subdimension. The biological subdimension of the person is what we'll talk about first. The biological person refers to the body's biochemistry, cells, organs, and physiological systems. It is the physical body of the person. The next component of the person dimension is the psychological dimension. There are three main subdimensions of the psychological person: cognitions, or conscious thinking processes, emotions or feelings, and self or identity. Sometimes a separate social or psychosocial subdimension of the person is included in multidimensional approaches. The social subdomain is used to describe relationships, stress, and coping patterns of a person that is related to behavior. The spiritual subdimension of the person refers to the aspect of the person that searches for meaning and purpose with a higher power. Some themes of the spiritual subdimension include morality, ethics, justice, interconnectedness, and creativity. People often connect with the spiritual dimension through mystical states, prayer, meditation, and contemplation. Let's check in. Just like the person, the environment can be understood to have distinct subdimensions. The dimensions of the environment include the physical environment, culture, social structures and social institutions, dyads, families, small groups, formal organizations, communities, and social movements. In the next few slides, we will briefly define each of these subdimensions. Each of the subdimensions will be explored further in later modules. Also, these dimensions are neither mutually exclusive nor hierarchically ordered. The distinctions help us to have a common language to discuss the dimensions. The physical dimension of the environment refers to the natural and human-built material aspects of the environment. Some examples of the natural aspect of the physical dimension are water, sun, trees. Some examples of human-built aspects of the physical dimension are buildings, landscaping, roads, bridges, ramps. The next dimension we'll talk about is culture. Culture refers to a system of knowledge, beliefs, values, language, symbols, patterns of behavior, material objects, and institutions that are created, learned, shared, and contested by a group of people. As mentioned earlier, these dimensions are not mutually exclusive. Each small group, organization, Family, community, or even social movement may have its own distinct culture. Social institutions are stable, organized pattern sets of roles, statuses, groups, and organizations that provide a basis for behavior in particular areas of life. Social structure refers to the set of interrelated social institutions. So, the collective of social institutions in a culture that are developed by human beings to provide stability to society and order to individual lives. Some examples of types of social institutions include government, economy, education, healthcare, social welfare, religion, mass media, and family. Dyads refer to two people bound together in some way, and they're an important dimension of the environment. These pictures show some examples of different dyads. Dyads can be a parent and child, a social worker and client, or a couple. Families refer to a social group of two or more persons characterized by ongoing interdependence with long term commitments that stem from blood, law, or affection. Some types of families that we'll talk about in this course are the nuclear family, the extended family, and chosen families. Families can have all different types of shapes and forms. Small groups refer to two or more people who interact with each other because of shared interest, goals, experiences, and needs. In fact, this course is an example of a small group. Some other examples of small groups are friendship groups, therapy groups, committees, interdisciplinary teams, and the infamous group project for grad school. Communities refer to people bound either by geography or by network links. Network links are webs of communication or are bound by common ties and interacting with one another. So, communities can be thought of as relational. So, relational communities are ones that are bound by common ties and network links, or geographic or territorial, which forms groups based on location. Some examples of relational groups may be a class in a school, exercise class, and then communities that are broader, like the LGBTQ community. These are some examples of geographic or territorial communities, a neighborhood, state, or country. Formal organizations refer to collectives of people with a high degree of formality of structure, working together to meet a goal or goals. As a social worker, you likely will work for a formal organization at some point in your career. Some examples include civic and social service organizations, business organizations, and professional associations. Social movements are consciously organized and sustained attempts by ordinary people working outside of established institutions to change some aspect of society. Social movements are an important part of the environment that social workers engage with. Some examples are the civil rights movement, the disability rights movement, the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, and many more. Let's check in. The third and last dimension is time. In this course, we will focus primarily on the person and environment dimensions because you will learn about the time dimension in the second course in the HIBC series when you study human development. For now, we'll briefly touch on the 3 subdimensions of time. Linear time can be measured with calendars and clocks, and it is what we typically think of as time. Although in some cultures, they don't use linear time to measure time and may use what is called event time, which centers around events like the sunrise or sunset or meals. Historical era refers to the specific block or period of time in which the individual and collective lives are enacted. The economies, physical environments, institution, technologies, and political circumstances of a specific era provide options and constraints for human behavior. For example, we can use historical era to think about how people use money. For instance, people who lived during the Great Depression may tend to be more frugal with money due to the circumstances and instability during that era. Lastly, chronological age refers to how people change at different ages and life stages as they pass from birth to death. This is one of the most enduring ways of studying both individual and collective behavior, is using chronological age. Lastly, we'll talk about how the multidimensional approach is used in social work practice. Social work practice is widely thought to have distinct phases: the engagement phase, assessment phase, intervention phase, and evaluation phase. We'll talk briefly how social workers use the multidimensional approach at each of these phases. For successful social work engagement, social workers must allow people to tell their stories. While people are telling their stories, social workers need to listen intently to extract information about the multiple dimensions of person, environment, and time. This can help to gather information and to ask good questions and appropriate questions during the assessment phase. In the assessment process, social workers collect information about all of these critical dimensions. In the assessment process, social workers also attempt to see situations from a variety of perspectives It's important to use multiple data sources, including the person, their significant others, and direct observations. Then, for intervention, you should link your intervention strategies to the assessment and to address each of the dimensions that were in the assessment. In general, you can expect more effective outcomes from interventions that are multidimensional because the situation itself is multidimensional. Let's check in one last time. So, in summary, social workers use a multidimensional approach to human behavior. This approach has been an integral part of social work's history and mission. The multidimensional approach that social workers ascribe to includes the person, environment, and time dimensions. Dimensions are separate parts of a whole understanding to a behavior, and each dimension has multiple types or subdimensions that are addressed in all phases of social work practice.